Greetings! Welcome to part 7 of my series on the science of Hinduism. In the description section of Played Already's video, he talks about some stuff that was in the ancient text that I guess in his mind it should be like a shocker to us that it talks about this stuff. As we've established in previous installments of this series, Played Already is of the attitude that there's advanced knowledge in the ancient text that shouldn't be there if it was just written by ancient people. So he thinks that this is evidence that it must be of a divine origin. And this is why, in addition to asking me to watch some of his videos, he also asked me to go over the stuff in the description section of the particular video that I've been responding to. So one of the things he brings up in the description section is that they had math and the decimal, which, kind of leaves me going, so what? I mean, Played Already himself kind of talks a bit in his description section about math evolving. Well, if it evolved, then we don't really have any reason to think there's any kind of divine intervention involved. But according to Played Already, the ancient texts also make mention of planets and advanced aircraft and electricity. And he points out that Benjamin Franklin did not really discover electricity, right? And he's right about that. Benjamin Franklin is not the person who initially discovered electricity. We've actually known about electricity since ancient times, right? Because, of course, ancient people would look up during a thunderstorm and they'd see lightning, right? That's electricity. And, of course, some of them knew about the electric eel, which produces electric shocks. And, they knew about static electricity, right? People would sometimes get shocked, right? Also, it's not conclusive, but there's a possibility that some of the ancients may have developed primitive batteries, right? There's some archaeological evidence to support this. I don't know what they would have used them for. It's open to speculation. But yeah, basically the ancient people knew about electricity, and some of them might have even known how to utilize it to some extent. But since electricity is something that can be observed in nature, in lightning or from an electric eel or when you shock someone, right? And a primitive battery is really not that hard to make with some pretty basic resources, I don't see how any of this would be any indication of advanced knowledge that must be of divine origin. So what about these advanced aircraft that Played Already mentions? Well, I tracked down an English translation of the ancient source material that Played Already cites, and found that sure enough, it talks about airplanes, at least in an English translation. And I would think that an airplane would qualify as advanced aircraft, at least by an ancient person's standards, if not a modern person's, since ancient people didn't have airplanes. But what ancient people did have is imagination. And that's something to keep in mind about airplanes, is that they were conceived in the imagination as hypothetical aircraft before we ever actually got a working airplane manned and, up in the air, safely flying around without killing anyone. Also keeping in mind that some of the attempts to develop flying machines prior to the actual working airplanes that we see today, some of those attempts did result in injury and death. Leonardo da Vinci, who lived from the mid-1400s to the early 1500s, is of course in part famous for his artwork depicting hypothetical aircraft. Now, while da Vinci is a pretty famous example of this, the truth is this was going on even back in ancient Greece, and technically even prior to that, because of course people depicted their gods as traversing the sky in some kind of vehicle or another. These vehicles typically were based on vehicles that we actually had down here on Earth at the time, land vehicles or sea vessels. Take, for example, the Egyptian sun god, who is sometimes depicted traversing the sky in a boat. Although in other ancient cultures, it was more common for the sun god to be depicted traversing the sky in a horse-drawn chariot, which of course is what we see with the Hindu sun god Surya. He also is depicted traversing the sky in a horse-drawn chariot. But anyway, the ancient Sanskrit word that's being translated into English as airplane is the word vimana, which has also been translated as chariot. And of course, flying chariots is one of the ways that vimana have been depicted in ancient artwork, but they've also been depicted as flying boats, and even, interestingly enough, these winged flying huts, houses, or temples, and even floating palaces. But there is also some reasonably old, albeit technically more recent concept art for vimanas, where they do in fact resemble kind of, more what we think of as like an airplane. And in really recent art, well, I got here, right, this is the first installment of a comic book series called 18 Days, something I've been reading. We have here in their concept art for Vimana, looks like kind of like a sci-fi-ish battle cruiser, like fires lasers. You got this like dude who's like driving it. He's like it's like a white bearded god in a white robe, like man in the controls. It's pretty silly actually. So yeah, regardless of the kind of modern or even futuristic depictions of Vimanas that we see in more recent concept art, it looks, based on what evidence is available to us, that back in antiquity when they first imagined the concept of gods traversing the sky in vehicles, what they were doing is just kind of thinking about what kind of technologies do we have down here on Earth, be it a chariot or a boat or a hut, a house, a temple, a palace. So yeah, once again, I'm not really seeing any indication here that we're looking at advanced knowledge that could only be of divine origin. So what about the planets? Is it true that the ancient texts talk about other planets? Well, of course they do. That would be pretty abnormal if they didn't. I mean, it's pretty normal across different ancient cultures to have people like mapping the stars and like noticing, here's this constellation, here's that one, right? So they'll like notice if there's something that shows up there that isn't usually there, right? So they did in fact notice that some of these brightly lit objects seem to kind of behave a little different than some of the other ones. So they did kind of make that distinction between the wanderers and the normal ones, right? The wanderers, of course, being planets like Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, right? Those are the kinds of ones you can look up and see in the night sky. And of course, not only was it common to know about the planets, but it was also common to deify them, right? Each planet being associated with a different god. So again, I'm not seeing any indication here of advanced knowledge that could only be of divine origin, right? Looking up at the night sky and noticing planets does not indicate they had advanced knowledge that could only be of divine origin, right? The fact that they deified the celestial objects and the various other aspects of nature goes to demonstrate a less advanced understanding of things. Well, that's it for this video, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and share it with other people. If you're interested in watching my future videos, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next one. So have a good one, guys, and peace.